Good morning to everybody. Good morning to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good morning, Ali.
And good morning to your excellencies. What a difference a year makes.
Yes.
Here's how it's going to go. I'm going to ask you all sorts of questions that are suitable for me as a member of the press, that may be entirely unsuitable for you. And you may answer whatever you wish. But we are in a different place than we were a year ago. I would argue that everybody in this room understands what the comments we just understood and the role that Qatar is trying to play and is playing in this very serious issue we've got in the Middle East right now. But given that these things get recorded and they go out and other people will hear them, I think it's useful to have an American diplomat, a senior one in this part of the world, help us understand in this moment where we are all hoping and praying for some sort of a deal that leads to a ceasefire and the release of all the hostages and some road to continuity and peace for the people who live in Israel and Palestine. What is the role of this country that we are in right now, and how have you seen that play out in the last 8 months?
Ali, it's good to see you this morning. I was looking at our last interview, and we've got to stop meeting like this, but you and I had a conversation last year when the world was in a heady place, thinking about this region, thinking about the advancements, the economic benefits, obviously the energy resources. And we sat here and we talked about a fragility that people weren't paying attention to.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think that the way I like to think about this is, as I think about this conflict, imagine it without Qatar. Imagine the negotiations going on without Qatar. Qatar is a country that doesn't have an axe to grind, isn't looking for a lever to pull, is a country that was dedicated to the Palestinian cause in a way that I think no other country in the region was prior to October 7. And they've continued this. Qatar does this not because it is a transaction and not because the United States has told them to. Qatar does this because in every instance over the last 6 or 7 years, when something has gone wrong in Gaza, something has gone boom in Gaza, the only way it has been tamped down is because Qatar was involved, because of their relationship with Israel, because of their relationship with Gaza and the Palestinians. Qatar has been indispensable. It would not make any sense for folks who are new to caring about the Palestinian cause to think that they could do this without Qatar.
Right.
It would be utterly impossible. Whatever the solution to this conflict is, it will come about because of Qatar's involvement.
Let's, without telling me anything that would cause you to have to kill me, let's discuss some of the mechanics of that, in that there is a narrative around the world and in America that this situation will not change without the adequate and appropriate pressure being put on by the United States. And there's validity to why people think that's true. But in terms of the mechanics of getting a deal done, talking to the people involved, the negotiations, tell me how much you can about the mechanics of the role that Qatar plays. So if America has an idea or a thought, or Secretary Blinken is in this part of the world, or Secretary Austin is in this part of the world, or any of the key players, tell me what the world is counting on Qatar to do.
Sure. The world is counting on Qatar to use their relationships, to use their voice, to ensure that there is constant and clear communication between the parties. I think about Qatar's ability to communicate with Hamas. That is a thing that we simply aren't able and aren't going to do. And so I think the question for the world is, would you rather have an adversary or a foe communicating your desire for the end to this conflict? And so Qatar has been able to do that. They are a trusted partner. I think about Qatar's relationship with Israel prior to October 7. The humanitarian assistance that went into Gaza, every dime of it, every real of it was coordinated between Qatar and Israel. And so there's a long-standing relationship there. When you hear that negotiations have picked up and you hear who's involved, the United States, Egypt, obviously Qatar, and Israel, then you know that that ability to convene, that ability to take what is said in that room and communicate it to Hamas clearly, so that what comes back is a true reflection of where we are in the negotiations. There's no other party in the world who could do that, and we're grateful that Qatar is available to.
You mentioned something interesting there. You said that this distribution of money, humanitarian assistance, and prior to that, the money that it takes to run Gaza, was in many cases distributed by or provided by Qatar to Gaza. There's a narrative that's been developing in American media that is a rogue enterprise, not one that has been in place for a long time and that has been agreed upon willingly by all the partners involved, including Hamas, the Palestinian Authority, governing organizations in Gaza, the UN, Qatar, the United States, and Israel. There's stuff going around in American media that says the problem here is that Qatar's been financing Hamas all these years.
Yeah. And so the truth is, and when I hear the numbers, sometimes those accusations come with numbers. Those numbers very closely align with the coordinated assistance that Israel and Qatar have allowed to go into Gaza. And so there isn't really, and hasn't been in the issuance of this money with cooperation of Israel, there has not been a nefarious intent or an unclear part of it. Part of the humanitarian assistance that Qatar has provided to Palestinians in Gaza is $100 for families. Now imagine in the United States, in Europe, the assistance that's keeping your family going is just $100. And Qatar has made sure with Israel that that money gets to where it needs to go by verifying lists, by providing some sort of confirmation that the money has gone to the right place. All of these things have been happening for years, this coordination between Israel and Qatar, and the moment that we are in now doesn't change the reality that for Qatar doing this work in a way that people were not paying attention to last summer, it's something they're dedicated to. It's part of their heart, part of their ethos, and not something that's a transaction between, I think, their most important partner, the United States, but something that they feel they have to do, a noblesse oblige, if you will.
Let's talk a little about this relationship between the United States and Qatar. It has been a strong relationship for a long time. Ambassador Shell enjoyed a very good relationship, and when the times I've spoken with the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister here about the bumpy road that occurred in between, Qatari officials tend to downplay that, but there was a bumpy road, and there was nobody here until you got here, and you've enjoyed a very strong relationship with Qatar. But you have, in the last 8 or 9 months, shot into one of the most important relationships that America has in the Middle East writ large. Tell me about, because I just always want to put a button on what happened with Saudi Arabia, with the blockade, and the fact that the Qataris will very generously say that Americans stood by them in that difficult time. There are some who would say America could have and should have done more. Is that behind us now?
And so I think it's a fantastic question. When Qatar, as you say, downplays it, I think that what has actually happened is that moment, I think around 2017, has been contextualized. In the same way that I worry about incomplete information in the media in the United States from some parties in the United States, incomplete information about Qatar, The truth is that if you look back on what happened in 2017, the transition from one administration to the other isn't just December and half of January before inauguration.
Right.
It goes well into that first year, and understanding what resources you have out in the world, what responsibilities you have out in the world, and I think probably the heartening part of what happened in that time period is that once the Trump administration was up on its feet and looked around the world and said, what are our priorities, we immediately shifted into a position where we realized our relationship with Qatar was so important that we had to do whatever we needed to do to make sure that conflict between the regional neighbors dissipated. And that's what we did. And so I think Qatar rightly sees America as having been a friend during that period, even though there are some steps that we took that might have been in the wrong direction in the initial phases.
Let's talk about, I was so praying that we would have gotten here and we'd be discussing an arrangement that we've arrived at with Israel and Palestine, and this may come. But let's talk about America's outlook on what that needs to look like. There is some criticism that what America states as a good goal, the outcome of a two-state solution, the recognition of a Palestinian state and a Palestinian state that manages both the West Bank, that works, that is functional, and Gaza, is quite far removed from the reality that many Israelis have and many Palestinians have, whether they live in Gaza or they live in the West Bank or they are refugees elsewhere. How do you square that? Nobody is saying that the American view of what should happen is a bad one, yep, but they are saying that it may not be in touch with the reality of what needs to happen on the ground, and very much like the Abraham Accords, it may not be consulting closely enough with the Palestinians, who have to have a role in whatever happens next.
Yeah, so I think that's a terrific question. If you'll allow me to geek out just a
Sure.
little bit on the international relations part of this. When I think about this region 20 years ago, when I think about the period just after 9/11, the United States, I think, kindly thought of this region as a monolith. But over the last 20 years, these relationships have become truly bilateral relationships. When you talk about the Abraham Accords, there are individual countries getting into these relationships, and they are more or less successful depending on the dedication of the countries that are in it. There has never been anything more difficult in international relations and foreign policy than the two-state solution. We've been trying to do it for 80 years. But here's the thing. The United States is dedicated to a two-state solution because anything less than that, we think, remains as an ember of conflict. It's a truly difficult thing to do. Anyone who talks about a two-state solution as something that's easy, like, oh, after this conflict stops, we're just going to get into a two-state solution. These are people who haven't understood how fraught this actually is. You're right. There is a moment, a psyche for Israeli citizens having been through the trauma of October 7. There is psyche among Palestinians having lost 30,000+ civilians in this conflict. But the truth is that we will go from conflict to conflict, big and small, between Israelis and Palestinians if we don't find a durable, irreversible solution. It is hard work. It is withering work. I think of Alfred Lord Tennyson, his poem Ulysses, right? Though much is taken, much abides. Though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are. One full temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will. We've been made weak by time and fate on the two-state solution, but we are strong in will. We are resolute. It is the only answer to this. And the sooner we get into it, the sooner Palestinians can live with the same liberty and freedom and hopeful futures that the rest of us live with, and the same for Israel. Their children should not go to sleep at night afraid that something's going to happen to them or their parents. And so the two-state solution is the only answer. It is not a frivolous thing. It will take all of us to do it, but we have to do it.
Are we better at, and I think we are, but you tell me, are we better at figuring out that any solution in any part of the world that America is going to be involved in after a conflict or after a bad situation really needs to involve the input of the people who are going to be the governed? We don't have the world's best track record. I think we've got a great track record of good goals and wanting there to be good governance, but it doesn't always translate. And this one is going to be fraught. Yeah. Right? This thing's got landmines all over it. We are going to, if this ends and the hostages are released and the fighting stops and there is something that's going to look like a durable two-state solution or something, it's going to have to take into account all the ways that can go wrong, because there'll be a whole lot of people ready to watch that fail.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. But I also think that when you say we don't have the greatest track record in involving the actual parties and not being directive, I think that if you look at the last 25 years, when we got into the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq, it was likely true that we thought we could put our thumb on the scale, that we would be able to direct people toward peace. But I think we have learned that lesson clearly in this century, that that's not how this works. And so a lot of the work that is being done right now, and of course a lot of effort is going into conflict resolution and ensuring the release of hostages, by the way, including American hostages. That's a priority for us. But there is a conversation being had by regional neighbors. It has to be the regional partners that have the relationship with the Palestinians who help them get to where they want to go, which we're assured is peace. We have to be facilitators. We have to be here to be helpful in that cause. But the truth is that I do think we have learned the lesson that ultimately, for parties to live with any resolution to their conflict, it has to be theirs. Often people think that the United States is problematic in the world. And, we have made decisions that we have had to live with, had to fix. But the truth is that if the United States is a problem in the world, it is also true that if there's going to be a solution, the United States must be part of it, must guarantee it, must support it, but we don't have to design and direct it, and I think we're clear on that now.
So many solutions to what seem to be intractable problems in history have been born out of something that has been so bad, or something that the partisans have become so tired of that they say there's got to be another way. An optimist like me looks at the Middle East and says, maybe we're at that moment. But I have heard the pushback, as I'm sure you have, to say coming up with another way, a durable peace right now, would be a reward specifically for what happened on October 7th. Right. How do you respond to that?
Well, first, I think we're clear that, first of all, the two-state solution, I'm not sure that Hamas is a supporter of the two-state solution, right? We're talking about providing an opportunity for these two peoples to live side by side. I want to address what happened on October 7 was a tragedy. What has happened to the Palestinians is a tragedy. And it is tough to talk about opportunity out of tragedy when the tragedy is ongoing. Mm-hmm. We are clear in support of a Palestinian government that is technocratic, that is non-violent, that is a supporter of individual Palestinian liberty. And I think that if we are able to do that, it does not give support to the idea that the Palestinian or that Hamas did something that caused this good thing to happen. The United States and our partners have been working in big ways and small ways on a two-state solution every day, essentially for the last 80 years. And so that we, our partners, are not afraid of getting it right, because some might say something that is, I think, wrong, would be a further tragedy, right? Diplomacy and foreign policy take courage, take a resilience and a resistance to risk. And so if we're able to do this, I don't think history will care that we continued this work on a two-state solution and provided enduring peace, because it's what Israelis and Palestinians deserve.
Yeah, I agree with that. You did touch on something, though, a moment ago, and that is that the key players to this, to the end of this conflict, Hamas and the current Israeli government, seem to be operating under some disincentives to come to the deal that a lot of other parties would have them come to, including the Americans. How do you deal with that? Because ultimately, the durable peace that leads to the creation, perhaps, of a Palestinian state and peace and endurance for the Israelis and the release of their hostages and the end of the fighting, kind of put a few people out of business right now, and we are seeing the impulses to hold on to power, perhaps exceeding those of trying to get to a solution at the moment.
And so it's difficult, and I think you're right. It would be disingenuous to sit here and not think that the personal sort of impulses and ambitions of individuals isn't impacting what we're trying to do. And so the complexity of this calls on us to find partners in Israel, to find partners in Gaza, so that we can work on this. If we had asked what the overwhelming feeling of Israelis and Palestinians was with this ongoing conflict prior to October 7, I think fatigue would be the overwhelming feeling. We have now seen tragedy added to that fatigue, but the fatigue hasn't gone away. We've got to be able to explain, to articulate the benefits of the two-state solution. We've got to have strategic patience with regard to absorbing some of the trauma, some of the reaction to trying to get this done. Our priority right now is making sure that hostages, including, again, American hostages, are released. But we have to be ready to not just wipe our brow and go back and pretend that this conflict didn't happen. We have to be ready to actually begin to do something that aids the future of generations of Israelis and Palestinians. And so the individuals, and by the way, this isn't only this region. The idea that a leader would want to maintain power, the idea that a militant group would want to maintain influence is...
it's the way of most conflicts.
Story as old as time. Right? And so there are lessons that we can learn and have learned about how to do this. All eyes will be on this. But here's what I know. We can't all go back to October 6th and worry about our regional economies and worry about data centers and AI and worry about buying new weapons systems. We have to dedicate ourselves to this because it may be the most focused opportunity that we have had in a generation and a half to actually do something that stands and helps the folks involved in this.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to put it. The president said something like that at Morehouse when there were some protesters saying that we are not looking just for a ceasefire. We are looking for a sustainable future. This is a tricky situation for America because on one hand, America has never had space between itself and Israel. And despite what might be our current president's personal antipathy toward some of the Israeli leadership, that space has not generally grown. America is standing by Israel very firmly. On the other hand, you have key American experts and negotiators who've been involved in the Middle East peace process for decades, who have said that America's role wasn't as fair as it could have been. The Aaron David Millers of the world to say that America was basically Israel's lawyer throughout the whole thing. Now we have a moment to recalibrate, and the recalibrating doesn't look like being less of a friend to Israel. What does it involve? What does being a fair player, if America's re-engaging and becoming a fair player that might be able to come up with a solution that is durable and lasting, what does the relationship between America and Israel need to look like?
And so there are a couple of things, and I think you make a great point. I would submit that if you look at the rhetoric coming out of the United States, out of the White House, from October 7 till now, that in the immediacy of the attack, I don't think any of us really knew how large this was going to be, and certainly couldn't have guessed the nature of where the conflict would go. What you were seeing in some cases is the United States, as I said, has always been working on a two-state solution. Sometimes we've been doing it somewhat publicly as part of a goal for an administration. But that work, that behind-the-scenes work, has always been balanced toward creating a durable state for the Palestinians and a two-state solution that provided peace. And that requires being an honest broker. And the United States has always been that. This moment, this very public moment for how we get into a two-state solution has required, I think, the president, who speaks for himself but also speaks plainly about the importance of a Palestinian state and a two-state solution and the safety of civilians in this. One of the things that's different is how could you look at what has happened to Palestinian civilians and not say out loud, whatever you're doing, they have to be considered, right? What is happening to them is a tragedy. And so I would think that if the president hadn't said that out loud, there would be cause for concern. And so while this looks similar to the way this conflict has gone in the past, it is also extraordinary. It is also a moment where there seems to be, even in the conflict, a desire to change the participants in the future of this, a desire to change the case for this. And so I don't think it's just the United States or the president who is changing rhetoric or being open about what's at stake here. I think you see the Israelis do that. I think you see regional partners do that. And so we're all in a new space here. It doesn't mean that the United States doesn't have as strong a relationship with Israel and the Israeli people. We have said that they have a right to defense. We have stood with them in their grief after October 7. But if we're going to do something that's going to, not to be too high-minded, that's going to change the world, then we're going to have to change how we do it.
In order to change the world, you've been having conversations with U.S. legislators, members of Congress and senators, and the issue of Qatar and its role does come up, some of the misconceptions that we've spoken about. What do you do to correct that? How do you sort of let people know, I think you may not be understanding the role that this country is playing, both in the region and in the specific effort right now to get a ceasefire and a hostage release?
Well, first I tell the truth, right, and a complete truth about our relationship with Qatar. I have to be unconcerned with a legislator or someone being upset with me because I tell them about the strength of our bilateral relationship, about Qatar's work to advance peace in Sudan, in Libya, in Somalia, in Lebanon, in Syria. I just have to tell the truth, and I can't be bothered by or concerned about the outcome. As I look at Qatar in this region, and I've said this before, I think of Colombia in South America, I think of Australia in the Pacific. These are countries that we are so aligned with that it allows the United States to do other things, to pursue other priorities. And so legislators need to understand that on balance, by the way, not even on balance, that Qatar is one of our strongest partners in the world. Sometimes I'm talking to legislators whose own states are enhanced, jobs are created, lives are made better because of their relationship with Qatar.
Or they have troops here.
Yeah, and it's a surreal conversation to have,
Yep.
But it's one that we have to have. I cannot get tied to, talking to a legislator on a Tuesday, giving them alpha to omega about the strength of this relationship. I cannot be tied to them going on TV on Wednesday and acting like the conversation never happened, right? My job...
Which happens.
Which happens,
Yeah.
Which happens. And I've gone from shock to delight on this because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
But the truth is that this relationship is whatever the positive version of a Gordian knot is, from Al-Udeid and defense and that growing relationship, from Qatar's strength in education, our trade relationship, the $60 billion of their $500 billion sovereign wealth fund that's invested in the United States. These are undeniable facts, and it's my job to let legislators know about all of them, sometimes to their great surprise, and then to do the work. I'll be in the United States in a couple of weeks, and every legislator that wants to talk to me, I will talk to, because I think this is important. I have a limited amount of time in Qatar. I'm halfway through a 3-year tour, and it is important to me, not just as a citizen, as a U.S. Marine, that the strength of our relationship, especially the security strength, is in a good place that can't be taken apart. I think about those troops out at Al-Udeid. If some conflict breaks out in the world that the United States has to be involved in, it's those young people
Yep.
who are going to have to fight that conflict. And so having an Al-Udeid that is properly resourced, that has the troops and the weapon systems that are necessary there, don't just act as a deterrent, because when they're needed, we need for everything in this relationship to be in the right place, and it always has been.
Ambassador, it is a pleasure to talk to you under tough circumstances. We appreciate your candor and letting us know where things stand here. Next year we'll be talking again, and we will be looking back at this as tough times that we got through, I hope.
Absolutely. Ali, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.